Hello, everyone. Hello again, and welcome to SDVOE Presents Face to Face AV with Justin Kennington. That's me, your host, Justin Kennington. I'm joined today by a new friend of mine and of the SDVOE Alliance, and that's Bren Walker, partner in integrated systems design at Kirkegaard. Bren, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be doing this and to have this conversation with you. It's going to be fun.
So we wanted to talk about what you do because I think it's an interesting niche in AV. So why don't we start with tell us a little bit about Kirkegaard and
Sure.
what's their specialty?
So, Kirkegaard is an acoustics firm that was founded in 1976 by Larry Kirkegaard. So, we're not far away from being 50 years old.
Wow.
And the firm was started to work on acoustics primarily for worship spaces, highly reverberant worship spaces, and concert halls. Larry came from BBN, and they at BBN had decided that acoustics was, it wasn't really necessarily a growth field. So he decided to branch off and start his own firm. The firm has worked on concert halls all over the world. I would say the first 20 years or so of the practice was really focused on natural acoustics. So this was a time when there were still budgets and willingness and interest in developing purpose-built rooms. So a room that supports an orchestra that isn't focused on any amplification necessarily, where the people who love that music had the sort of mindset that you go into this space and it becomes a place where you forget everything else electronic or digital, and you just get absorbed in the sound of the music without anything sort of quote interfering with the experience. Over time in the 90s, as we've seen this decline of the uptake of classical and chamber music by younger people, that audience has continued to get older and older, and interest for music performed in venues that are a little more sophisticated than a club has increased dramatically. It started increasing dramatically in the 90s. I think world music, actually, the advent of world music, as it's called, had something to do with that, because in my mind, the music that you might hear that was considered traditional from another culture was also music that would fit the classical environment in terms of people playing natural instruments that would benefit from having a natural acoustic that supports them without necessarily the need for amplification. As we've seen, the cultural interest in classical music has declined and interest in other forms of music and other forms of performance have increased. Venues have had to diversify how they could present different programs. So amplification made its way into the concert hall and into the recital hall, and now it's kind of there to stay. I would say at our firm, we initially had folks who were doing audio system design, and they were really focused on how does an audio system play in a room that has a 2-second reverberation time, which is a very, very long time.
Yeah.
And it's a challenge to amplify in spaces like that because you're dealing with intentional sound reflections that are coming from the walls, from different elements across the sidewalls, different elements in the room that are intended to bring the sound back to the audience. Now, if you're doing amplification in that kind of space, then you have more reflections than you maybe want to have, and it makes it a little more challenging to control what people hear. So our AV designers, the first ones at the firm, were audio designers who were people who understood acoustics very well. Now what we do is everything from audio, video, digital signage, streaming, live streaming, recording. I mean, all of the elements that someone might need in a performance venue, or in a media production studio. We're doing a lot of media production work now as
So
well.
you're
So the firm has grown and diversified essentially as culture has
yeah, what I'm
changed.
hearing is Kierkegaard started out with these customers who are the cultural venues, the performance venues, and what you've done is essentially stick with those customers and evolved your practice as their needs and what they need to present have evolved. Is that a fair
That's right.
way to see
And
that?
yeah, and the user the ultimate user of the systems or the space has evolved, right? So in 1985, 86, the concert hall was the venue. The operator of the hall was the client. The user was a symphony orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
So that meant that the director of that symphony orchestra was the primary person we were listening to, because they were responsible for how you play the room, how you treat the room like another instrument along with the other players. As time has gone by, the owner of that building, the operator of that building has stayed the same, but the users have shifted. Now, the orchestra is one tenant who uses that building. There might also be a dance company that uses that building, a jazz orchestra, a promoter who brings in, the adult contemporary artists that would be considered sort of pop repertoire next to a symphony. So, and then everything to, artists who are basically sound designing the room and presenting music that is electronic and immersive, right? So what they're doing is really, they're playing the room in a different way, and the way that they're playing the room takes advantage of the technology in it. So the end user has continued to evolve. The customer pretty much has been the same. There were times when the firm worked just for an orchestra because the orchestra owned their building, right? The orchestra owned and operated that building. That model is no longer really supported, except for maybe the top 3 or 5 orchestras in the country. Most now are sharing their space with other forms, and those that want to stay relevant culturally welcome the sharing of it with other forms, because it's bringing in younger audiences.
Right, it's got to bring an audience.
And it's yes, exactly. And it's staving off the graying of their audience, which would eventually mean their end, right? If all your patrons go and pass on, you've got nobody else to play for. So it's been a welcome thing, I think, for folks who figured out that they want to have the young family with their 2 kids come on a Saturday afternoon.
Yeah.
They want to make it relevant to that teenager who otherwise would not show up, but is coming because mom and dad said they have to. Now, how do you do something that they find interesting? Let them use their phone. That's one thing. Give them a presentation and program that allows them to interact and to engage, because that's a big part of how they live their lives. Let them take pictures, let them take selfies, and really leverage what technology can do to give them as immersive an experience as they might have if they put on goggles and played a game. So.
Wow. Now, you first of all, everything you just said there has sent my mind off in like 5 fascinating directions that I want to dig in and learn more about. And I don't think we have time for all of that.
Sure.
So I'm going to focus myself. But, when I picture concert halls, right, where you started talking about this, and the acoustics are designed in a sort of analog, purpose-built space sort of way, right? My mind goes straight to, Carnegie Hall, the really big ones. And then at the end of what you were saying there, you touched on how, I don't know the ownership structure of Carnegie Hall in particular, but there are a few very, very top programs where this is still focused on the orchestra, and I'm imagining that something like Carnegie Hall, I could be totally wrong, kind of fits that mold. But then I'm realizing that for you to have a business, there's got to be more than those, 2 or 3 venues in the top 2 or 3 cities in the world. So you're talking about, the Performing Arts Center in Topeka, Kansas, or whatever it is. That these are the folks
Exactly.
that want to support an orchestra, but that want to support world music, that want to support kids programming, that want to support all those things you said. So where am I going with this as a question? Because I'm really fascinated by this idea of the merging of sort of electronic sound reinforcement and natural acoustic sound reinforcement, and how those two are at odds with one another. Let's talk a little bit about the way that those two things kind of step on each other and get in each other's way. You talked about already, having a room with a 2-second reverberation is a massive challenge when you're trying to amplify that room with speakers, right? You want a pretty dead room because you can put speakers wherever you need sound. I don't need more sound. I want to put the sound where I want it with speakers. Is there any way does that ever work in reverse? Do the speakers and the amplification, do they get in the way of the acoustic environment? Are people still using the acoustic environment? Maybe let's start there. The natural acoustics.
Yes, they are. And the ways in which the speakers get in the way is what's sort of twofold. One, if they're used And if the person mixing is not able to mix in a way that they become
Yeah.
invisible, right? I mean, any kind of show you go to, you should sort of forget about the equipment that's driving that show. Unless the equipment, the technical aspect of it is something that is at the
Sure.
heart of it and part of the presentation. But otherwise, any show you go to, you should get so absorbed in what is happening that you forget that there's a 14 stack array on either side of you, right? So in those environments, the mixing is more challenging and it's less forgiving. So if you have someone who, if you have a program where you have to have some light amplification, maybe you've got some voice going on with an orchestra, or you've got other electric instruments, then the mix becomes important because it needs to feel seamless to the person in the audience, and it still needs to feel like psychologically it's all coming from the stage. So that's the primary way in which I think they get in the way. The other thing is in the core design of the venue itself. If you know you're going to have a lot of amplification being active in that space, then your natural place that you start in terms of your reverberation time is a shorter time, right? So that you can basically, the deadest that you can make the room, you design for that so that you can use amplification in that room without it being as challenging. And this can be done with, physical goods to adjust the acoustics. So this is why you'll see spaces that have curtains, right? Because those curtains are brought out to to basically make the room to absorb sound, so that so there are fewer reflections coming off side walls or rear walls, and you're really controlling what's the sound is coming from the speakers. So the desire for amplification in a space, it often will mean that the reverberation time is going to be shorter, and the natural acoustic may not be as live as you would find in an older, more traditional concert hall. So that means can mean a couple of things. If you're talking about student performers, we do a lot of higher education work, both for in their performance venues and in the teaching spaces that are rehearsal spaces that students use. So we're careful about making sure that those musicians have enough support, especially for singers, because it's not a natural thing to understand how to hit the back of the room with your voice. That's something that you learn how to develop as you learn how to sing. And less experienced singers need more support in terms of feeling their voice fill up the room and come back to them. So it's a fine line that you have to walk. Professional musicians are much more adept at dealing with whatever the condition is. I think about like the LA Phil. The LA Phil plays a lot of shows at the Hollywood Bowl. The Hollywood Bowl is not developed
there's
like
nothing
a
to bounce off of.
It's not Walt Disney Concert Hall, right? Exactly. So those musicians understand how to play that environment. They understand that they're not going to get feedback from the room. They're going to rely on monitors. They're going to rely on the system at the bowl to project their sound. And they're going to adjust their performance accordingly, right? How much you push, how much you don't. So more seasoned musicians have had to learn how to play different venues and how those venues might be. Some of them might be drier than they want, and some they might have the blessing of some being as live as they want. But the drier condition is the condition that you have to have to support amplification. And we do a fair amount still of physical goods to make that happen. We're starting to do more with electroacoustic enhancement systems now that there's a diversity of them, and they're more a part of, you can now design one that's more a part of the core PA.
Tell us
and how you amplify the room.
Tell us a little bit more about what that is. I've come across it a little bit before, so I have some idea, but our audience might not, and I could use more info.
Sure. Sure. So an electroacoustic enhancement system essentially it elongates the reverberation time digitally. So it by placing microphones throughout the room and speakers in specific locations, you pick up what's going in the room and you give it back to the room with and giving the sound, making it feel as though there is a longer reverberation time than there actually is by
So,
using the sound that's in the room
so the idea
itself
here is
and
to
feeding
make
it
your
back into
room
the system.
sound like a different room. I think this electroacoustic enhancement stuff is fascinating. It's so cool. I would love to play with one. I think the man that you mentioned who said his worst mistake was telling anybody he installed it just needs a better marketing person like me, right? Because this is simple, right? You know what? We've listened to your feedback. We understand you don't like it, so we've disabled the system.
That actually happened at some concert halls in
Problem
Europe where
solved.
they were like, you know what, it's off. And it wasn't, but no one knew the difference. And it was like,
There
okay,
you
well, this
go.
is the thing, right? Like,
Problem
you
solved.
know, but it's natural. You want to, you're any technology innovation, you're excited about what you've come up with. You want to share it with
Sure.
people. You know, you want to say, here's how it works, here's what it is, especially nerdy people who work in audio. Like
Absolutely.
that's we're in this field because we're nerds. Somewhere in us there's our somewhere in us is our nerd that loves something about audio or video or communication or technology or something. That's why we're here,
Yep.
right? So it's only
Yep.
natural that you'd want to share that, right? And the thing that he didn't account for was psychology, and so
Right.
much of what we do is driven by psychology. You know, our brains
Yeah.
fill in things that are missing. It's the only reason why we can stand and listen to 128K MP3 is because our brains fill in what's missing in those files. When we see a
Yeah.
presentation, our brains are filling in things that we're not cognitively picking up. And you know, we can leverage that in technology. We've already leveraged it. It's how we got to compression. It's
Sure.
how we've gotten to, you know, being able to do projection mapping and how people perceive the entire image, even if the entire image isn't there. So
Yeah. I'm curious. In just a few minutes here, we talked about some really complex issues around acoustics and how they used to be, acoustics and how they are now, and how amplification, all these things we talked about. How does your client, your typical client, communicate with you about this stuff? Are they savvy about these things? Are they coming to you and saying, I want a really live room and I know that that's going to impact the speakers and blah, blah, blah? Or, or are they saying, I don't know what's going on here. It's your job to make it sound good. Teach me.
yeah,
How hip to this are they?
you know what? There's a fair level of sophistication at the operator level. The people who
It makes
actually
sense.
run the spaces, they may not have, you know, a specific education for it. They may not necessarily have all the language for it, but they understand it very, very well.
Mm-hmm.
It's at
Well, they
the
live it, right?
yeah, it's at the administrator level where you may have less understanding, but musicians
$100,000 worth of curtains. Get out of here.
exactly. Or try $500,000 worth of curtains. I mean, exactly. Um, but anybody who's had to play a space, they have some sort of understanding of it, right? From playing spaces and realizing, oh, this room that has carpeted seats is different than the room that has wood seats and wood floor. You know, I'm working harder in this
Mm-hmm.
room than I would working in that other room. And once you've got comparative experiences as a musician or as a mixer, then you get it. You may not have all the language,
Yeah.
but you certainly get it. Um,
Well, meanwhile, you're talking about the chairs, and I'm thinking it also matters if somebody's sitting in those chairs. This is just kind of a silly little question, but how do you test out a room when you don't have 500 or 5,000 people sitting in it? Does anybody ever stuff dummies in the chairs as a test,
I think
or what
I think,
or what?
yeah, I think they used to do that. They used to do that. Now we
Okay,
model, right? So
okay,
we can with our models we can take into account, you know, the mass of a person. And if you have a 325 seat room, what does that additional mass mean? And then you're going to design the acoustics design is going to be with that in mind. right?
Okay.
Understanding those
Okay.
people are absorbing sound. That's what's going to happen with people in the room. So the room that's
Okay.
bare empty has one sound, of course, and then once people are in the seats, it's another. And with a lot of our higher education projects, a lot of times we have to take into account that the room's gonna be mostly empty. If you're at a traditional school or
Mm-hmm.
traditional music school and you're the second piano recital of the day on a Wednesday afternoon, you might get 15 people, maybe. That means somebody
If
from
you
family
have a big
came in town.
family.
Yeah, somebody from family came in town, or if it's a school where they require all the students to attend a certain number of recitals in order
Yeah,
for the
sure.
room to be more full. But this is the reason why. I mean, the projects that I'm working on now, where we've really pushed our clients to think beyond the old recital and to think about, well, what happens when you put a DJ and a guitarist and a drummer and a percussionist in this space? Because to them, this is the music now that they want to make. They got Bach, they got Brahms, they got all of it, and now they're trying to forget about it, have it just be ingrained in them, and now they're trying to do
Mm-hmm.
that next level music. And there's no reason why your recital hall, your typical recital space, shouldn't support that. It should. And even
Wow.
at the high school level, at the prep school level, we're seeing now where folks are, I think about one particular project for a prep school not far from where you are in Massachusetts. And one of the teachers at that school said, the sexiest thing to me is a solo cello sitting in the middle of the room with nothing amplified. I'm like, that's cute, but that's not the sexiest thing to your students, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Your students are already like, they're well past you on that. They may do that, but even that cellist now, and this is, what's happening with our field, music is moving the same way, where musicians now have to do a lot of things if you want to have a sort of middle class existence as a musician. You're not going to get a seat in an orchestra that's going to pay for you to put your kids through college. So that
Right.
means you're going to do a lot of different things. You're going to participate in making music for visual media. You're going to perform with different kinds of groups. You're probably going to teach. You might even just do talks. There are all these different things that you could end up doing to round out your career so that you make enough money to be a working musician. And our spaces are reflecting that. One of the biggest things that we're doing now in cultural venues or venues for performing arts is making sure the equipment is there for people to enjoy it outside of the venue, so live stream broadcast, but also for the artists themselves to learn how to present themselves with video, whether it's just a performance or talking about their performance, but having people get to know them and to think about the experience that they give someone through video as being different than the experience that you get sitting in the room. Both
Mm-hmm.
equally real, but they're different. One is physical, one is digital. A
Yeah.
huge part of what we do
Yeah.
now is,
Certainly, we've learned that here in what we do these days. They're both impactful, but very different.
yeah, and video is the number one form of communication in the world. So if you
Mm-hmm.
haven't learned how to express yourself with video and you want to go out in the world, really at this point to do anything,
Yeah.
you've got to understand how to do it. No one is sending out demo reels of their music that's just audio files anymore. If you're
Okay.
auditioning for something, your audition is video. And, we should be there with how we hire people in terms of the resume now. Shouldn't be a flat thing in with text anymore. It really should be
Oh wow.
video, because it's an introduction to who that person is and how well they can speak to what it is that they do, which for a lot of fields now matters a great deal. Can you communicate? You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's big for everything, whether you're designing AV or being a musician or anything else.
exactly. I mean, half
Um.
half the game in AV systems design for us, and I'd imagine it is for others as well, is how well do you communicate what that design is to the client? How well do they understand what you're developing for them? And then
Not to
how,
put too fine a point on it, but if you want $500,000 for curtains, you better be able to explain how that's going to be useful to them.
Exactly. And how well are you teaching people to use the systems once they're there?
Sure.
How good is the user experience? And how good is the user interface? These things, before it was like, you fire up a stack of equipment that was going to run an audio system. Nobody had to worry about looking at a screen to get a PA up and going,
Yeah.
right? Now you do have
Yeah.
to. And
Yeah.
there's an expectation that, that kind of system can support a number of different users, that it can support the operations manager who is also the second audio and knows how to take the thing apart inside and out, but also support the marketing coordinator who just needs to go in and get things ready for somebody to do a lecture or to
Yeah.
do a presentation. It needs to work for both of them. And that's all through user interface and user experience design. So
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think it's exciting
Um,
how the field has grown in that way.
I'm glad you're excited because that leads me. I want to ask you one more question. This has been an absolutely fascinating discussion. It went in a totally different direction than I expected,
Yeah.
but I love it when that happens because it means I
Okay.
was interested in something. What? So, last question for you is what excites you today in a new project? Somebody calls you up and says, "Bren, here's what I need." What are you hoping that they're going to say to you?
Uh, well, there's a couple of things. One, I'm hoping that they want to do immersive
Okay.
because we now have the thing about, and this is sort of going back to our origins as a firm for Kirkegaard. The one of the key things about natural acoustics was the sense of envelopment, right? And that's why you want all
Yeah.
those reflections so that the person sitting there feels like they're in the middle of the sound. And for the longest time, our amplified version of that was simply left right or left center right, and everything was sort of really flat coming at you
Okay.
from one direction. Then we saw the expanding into surround, right? 5.1, 7.1. Again, these are giving you more points from which the sound is coming from to give you a greater sense of envelopment. So today we can actually recreate what that natural acoustic did in terms of having people feel like they're being enveloped by the sound. So whenever anybody wants to do immersive audio or immersive video, we're all about it because that to me is about giving people taking away the limitations of the stereo experience and
Hmm.
getting closer to the way we actually hear things because we don't just hear them here and here like that. When we
Yeah.
hear things, we hear them all around us, and it's different. One of the things, one of the manufacturers I'm super excited about what they continue to do with their products is L Acoustics. Their
Okay.
Lisa system, which is like a drag and drop surround kind of system, allows you to place instruments anywhere. So if I want to put the drums up here over my head, further back, and have them sound a particular way, I'm doing that in software and it's real easy. It's like make that move, drag it to this place. Now let me go sit and listen and see what that feels like. They've also launched a product called Ambiance, which is another way of doing electroacoustic enhancement that basically leverages your existing sound system and gives more tools to the engineer to play the room and to figure
Okay.
out what they want coming from where in the room. So immersive audio, immersive video, all about that. Um, Second thing is use of projection as art. And I'm finally getting some clients who are getting into this, who are understanding that, they have an art budget. We do a lot of new construction. So projects
Sure.
being built from the ground up. They have a budget for art. That art does not have to be the traditional painting or sculpture anymore. That art can be an immersive digital video presentation that then changes, or it could be a digital mural, right? So that the canvas is what is static, but what ends up being on that canvas can change depending on the season, or whether or not you could do a competition and have different people in a community propose different murals, and it
Hmm.
makes the art more evolving, more alive, more dynamic. And then the last thing is virtual production. And we're working on a project right now that has a hybrid stage. So, think Mandalorian,
Hmm.
where everything is instead of having green screen, you've got You've got a video wall behind you. The set is completely pushed to that wall,
Yep.
and the actor is immersed both with walls, ceiling, floor, all representing the scene. And this, I mean, it's revolutionized film production. It's coming for theater. It's coming for everything. I mean, the project we're working on now is for, one of the top research universities in the country, and they're going to use it for every discipline. It's not going to just be performing arts. The business
Wow.
school could use it. The School of Sciences could use it to explain, here's what happens in the middle of this canyon. So you place
Yeah,
the
yeah.
professor in the middle of a canyon. Here's what you experience here. So that to me is one of the most exciting things. It enables people to participate from anywhere. So your actor could be in, Dubai, and you could send them to a virtual production set, and they could perform there while the main cast is in Burbank. Pretty cool
Wow. I,
stuff.
I think you're working on maybe the most fun fringe of AV right now. At least
Mm.
that's the way you make it sound to me. I'm in. Like, let's do this.
I've gone after the fun fringe stuff, knowing that the rest of the world would catch up, and it does. And on
Yeah.
virtual production, it's catching up so fast. Like,
Yeah.
this is now a thing where it was like, oh, you needed $1 million to build one of these. Now you've got schools that are building their own VR virtual production cubes for under 200,000, and
Wow.
it's giving the students the opportunity to understand. Okay,
Right.
I'm
What
going
a
to
thing to learn
design my
on.
set using
Yeah.
the Unreal Game Engine.
Yeah.
Right? So if you understand game design, now suddenly you can do set design for productions.
Yep.
And if I need to move that tree, I need to make that tree shorter and move it further back. That's rewriting code and re-uploading it. It's not somebody taking out
I don't need
some
a shovel.
physical things. Exactly. Or moving the tree on the set in the old sets up at Paramount or something. Now it's like rewrite the code, let it render, reload it, and now you're reshooting your scene in
Yeah.
minutes.
That's
So
fascinating.
it's very fascinating stuff, and it's not Huddle Spaces.
Oh, there it
No
is.
slam on
There
Huddle
it is.
Spaces.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. The claws are
No
coming
slam
out
on
for you, Huddle Spaces.
no slam on Huddle Spaces. Hey, it's hard to get a Huddle Space right, as we've seen. But generally,
That's certainly true.
in defense of my colleagues who do corporate AV, most of the issues in those rooms are not AV's fault. Most of the
Yeah.
issues in conference spaces go back to somebody being cheap about the acoustics.
Okay.
And then the
Yeah.
conference system has to try to compensate for that. So I feel for my colleagues in the
Uh,
field who have to
I've
work
got
on
a
those.
I've got a personal situation in one of my company's offices that can attest to that. All you guys back in Quebec struggling with that Zoom room, I'm real sorry about that entirely glass wall on two sides.
Exactly.
It's never gonna work.
Exactly. It's not going to work. And no matter what you put in the room, if you can hear sound from outside, you're not going to change that.
That's it. That's
You
it.
know,
Here's
if you
here's
hear
my tip for
sound
you guys.
traveling,
See about getting $500,000 worth of curtains in that conference room, and then maybe.
exactly. So we're fortunate in that our projects, people care about what we do a great deal. And the acoustics matter a great deal. The environment matters so much that we are lucky that proper attention and resources are put towards the things that support what we do. And we have an opportunity with our design partners to say, here's the reason why you can't have your window. And generally, we'll be the ones to win. So
That's just what I was observing. How lucky you are to have customers who are buying AV because it's so in direct support of what they do. At the end of the day, in the conference room, in the huddle space, right? I'm here to run a business. I'm not here to have an AV system. The AV system is here to try and, let me share PowerPoints or whatever. But what you do is for a customer who's there to communicate in an auditory and a visual way. And for your job to be supporting that, that's really cool. Bren, this
yeah.
was so much fun. I am glad we had this chat. I'm going to have you back on the show after the new year. We're going to talk even more
Great.
about immersive audio video because I want to learn more about that stuff.
Yeah.
And
I mean, we
for now,
touched on we
we
touched on so many different things. I'm happy to, come back and talk more about talk more about those things, talk more about virtual production, because I think everyone in our field should have some basic understanding of what's going on with that,
Yeah.
and how to employ it or deploy it with whatever it is, whatever the work is that you're doing. If you haven't encountered it yet, within the next 24, 36 months, you're going to. So anything I can do to further and help other folks in the field, I'm really happy to do that.
Awesome. Well, Bren, thank you so much for joining us. Those of you who want to hear that next conversation when that happens, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you'll be notified when that video comes out. We do this every week now, so tune in next Tuesday and next Tuesday and next Tuesday to find our next episode. Bren, thank you one more time. Thanks to all of you for watching, and good night.